Dr. Woskov.
Hola, sí, gracias Samantha. En primer lugar, quiero, Ben, agradecerle la disposición inmediata que ha tenido para esta entrevista. Como usted sabe, para nosotros, estoy hablando desde Bahía Blanca, Argentina, donde funciona una filial de la Bnei Brit, y le hablo en nombre de la Bnei Brit Argentina. Como usted sabe, la Bnei Brit es una organización de derechos humanos y reconoce en usted un luchador por la justicia. En nuestro país, la Argentina, en la historia reciente, sufrimos 2 cruentos atentados terroristas a la Embajada de Israel y a la AMIA, es decir, a la Asociación Mutual Israelita Argentina, con muchas víctimas, ambos en la ciudad de Buenos Aires, y los autores están impunes. Por ello, su perseverancia, su confianza en la ley, es una guía para todos nosotros. Y lo es más para los abogados y estudiantes de Derecho que hoy se incorporan a este Zoom para conocer su vida, para escuchar sus opiniones y sus consejos. Los que hemos defendido a los perseguidos sabemos muy bien quién es Ben Ferencz. Mi agradecimiento especial en nombre de la Bnei Brit Argentina a Samantha Rodríguez del Río, a su grupo The Voice of the Silence, que hacen posible hoy que tengamos esta extraordinaria posibilidad de escucharlo. También a quienes han auspiciado este evento desde esta misma ciudad del sur de la Argentina, de Bahía Blanca, a la Universidad Nacional del Sur, a la Cátedra sobre Genocidios del Departamento de Derecho, al Colegio de Abogados de Bahía Blanca y a la Asociación Médica. Muchas gracias, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woskov. And just to start, I want to say that I am Samantha Rodriguez, as he said, and we are here part of the Voice of the Silence, Holocaust Awareness Project that was founded by me, and also my collaborator, Jessica Lepe, that is here. She's a historian, and also I want to thank, Diario Judío México that is always with us. Of course, Dr. Woskov, Bnei Brit Argentina. Also, all the universities he mentioned, the Departamento de Derecho UNS, Colegio de Abogados de Bahía Blanca y Asociación Médica de Bahía Blanca. And also just a special thanks to Frida Castellanos, the mother and the daughter, that they are interpreting for us today, and they are daughter and granddaughter of Arturo Castellanos, Righteous Among the Nations of El Salvador. He's a consul from El Salvador, and they are their descendants. So thank you so much, both Fridas. And thank you, Ben, a lot because of your effort to be here today and your spirit, your young spirit of telling your story. So I will start just asking you some questions, and you can tell us about your story. And also, if someone of the public, you have some question, you can write it on the chat. And thank you so much for joining in. Well, at first, Ben, say hello to everyone. How are you today?
I'm always fine because I'm going into my 103rd year, and the doctors tell me that I'm in wonderful shape. So I'm always grateful to be able to still talk to you. And I do appreciate all of the sponsors from Argentina and other countries who are eager to hear what I have to say on this important subject of history. So I thank all of you for the opportunity of talking to you, and I'm feeling fine. I hope I'll be as well later on.
Thank you so much, Ben. We really admire you, your strength, your spirit, and we want to hear your story. So please tell us at first, where were you born? And how was your childhood and everything when you were young?
Well, when I was born, I was young. And I was born in a little village in Transylvania, a country that no longer exists. My sister was born in the same bed in the same place I was a year and a half earlier. You see it on the map, Transylvania. And the reason it doesn't exist because after the First World War, they split it up, part to Hungary and partly to Romania. I came from the area of Cluj, which you see on your map. And since both, I learned immediately that it's not what you call a country that's important. It's how you treat its people. And since both Hungary and Romania were violently anti-Semitic, my parents decided wisely to better try to get out of that whole area and go to the land of promise, which was the United States, where my memory begins. But that's the background we came from. It was poor, there was unemployment, there was persecution. There was not a place where anybody wanted to be if they had a chance to get away. And we have similar problems today.
Wow, yes, I think it's terrible that, of course, we know that anti-Semitism has been in all the world for centuries, but yeah, it's terrible that you had to go out from your city, your country, Transylvania, because of that hate, and you had to go to the USA. So tell us, how was to arrive to the USA, to be in New York? How was the life?
Well, since I was only 9 months old, I can't recall specifically how the ride was, but I know from talking to my parents that it was in the winter time. It was cold. We slept on the open deck. Only reason we traveled third class was because there was no fourth class. And it was a difficult voyage. And we went past the Statue of Liberty, which had welcomed all people who were fleeing unemployment and persecution. We spent the first night in a Hebrew home for the immigrants. And after that, it was a problem of finding a job. My parents couldn't speak English. They had very little education. They'd never read a book. They had 2 little children with them. And they were lucky when you see a picture of me on the right-hand side with a puffed up face. I was about 5 years old then. And when my father took me to school to have me enrolled when I was about 6 years old, they said, no, they couldn't take me because I didn't speak English and because I was too small. And they said, come back next year. Well, we came back the next year and it was the same story. I was still too small. I still didn't speak English. But eventually, they took me in the public school system in New York City in an area which was known as Hell's Kitchen. It got its name because it was a high-density crime area. You're flashing on a picture of this type of tenement house, which my father was the janitor for 3 of those houses. And we lived in the cellar, and there was not much air there. So my mother would put me up on the stoop, which was 12 steps up to reach the sidewalk. And I would have to sit there guarded by my sister that I didn't run around. And that's where my earliest memory begins. In an area known for its high crime, parents who couldn't speak English were working. My father is a janitor for a few houses, and we can take it from there. You don't want me to keep on telling you the whole story. It may take you too long. But would you like me to continue on and tell you what?
Please tell us about your education, because you ended up studying in a such an important university. So how did you end up there, right?
All right, well, I'll carry on. If I'm speaking too long, tell me. If you want me to spread it out, I can spread it out too. I finally was accepted in school. By that time, my parents were divorced. They had married when they had been prearranged by their elders, and it was not a correct choice because they were fighting all the time. They had no money. Life was very difficult. And when they separated, divorced, I was about 6 years old. I went to the public school in Brooklyn where an aunt of mine lived, and she took us in. And I was doing pretty well in school. We moved around very frequently. Finally, when I was in the 8th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Connolly, whose name I still remember, and the principal, Mr. Stanton, whose name I still remember, were called in. My mother came because they were divorced from my father, and the teacher began and saying, "You have a very gifted boy here, and he should go to college." Well, my mother hardly spoke much English, and she said to me in Yiddish, "What is this, a gifted boy?" I didn't know. I never had given any gifts. So neither of us knew what she was talking about. But she eventually explained, but my mother said, "How come we afford to go to college?" Then we knew college cost money. We didn't know anybody who went to college. And so she said, "Well, if he goes to a special high school," which you had shown a minute ago, Townsend Harris High School, named after some diplomat, if he passes it, it's a college type curriculum, he would be admitted free of charge into City College. And so you see a picture there of Townsend Harris High School. I don't know if I'm sitting in the audience, I don't think so, but we're all little kids in a very difficult high school. So I immediately flunked in the algebra and in French. And the reason I flunked was I didn't know why I needed algebra with all those funny equations, and I didn't know anybody who spoke French, and I didn't want to speak French. I wanted to speak English. So I had some trouble in school at the earliest days. However, eventually, I fell in love with a French actress, Danielle Derrieux. I was in about 8 years old. And she was showing in a movie house near our house, and I talked into the doorman to let me come in and study French. They would speak in French, but there was a script on the bottom in English. And he was a kind man, and he said, "Come sit in the back." And she was in love with Charles Boyer. I don't know whether these names will mean anything to you in Argentina, but she was a big actress, and he was a big star. And so I learned to speak French like Charles Boyer. Venez avec moi, chérie, nous allons Gaspard, and tout ça. And I was very good. and so I managed to get through school, and I went to a special high school, Townsend Harris High School, which they also showed. It was the only one of its kind in the United States, where it had a tough curriculum, college level. And if you passed Townsend Harris, you would automatically go free of charge to City College. And so that is called what we accepted. We went to City College, where the most important thing I learned was that if you want to pass, you have to study. I never studied. I heard it, and I knew it. But in City College, I soon learned that if you apply yourself, you can pass. If you don't, you won't pass. Well, I got out of the Townsend Harris, went into the City College of New York, where I had decided that I had to decide upon my career. I knew I didn't want to become a crook because everything I saw when I was young was corruption and crookedness. The police were bribed, and I was not allowed to play with other kids who were called the bums. They used me as a mascot. And so my parents were divorced, and I was living in Brooklyn with two cousins my age, our age. My sister was with me. And we went into City College. And while I was still in college, war broke out. Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor. And I'm trying to figure the time. In any case, everybody I knew volunteered to serve their country. And I volunteered as well. And but I thought I would do better in the Air Corps. That appealed to me somehow. And they tested me, and they said, we can't accept you because your feet won't reach the pedal. And I said, well, how about if I go as a navigator? So they tested me on that. And they said, if we told you to bomb Berlin, you'd probably end up in Tokyo. So I didn't do for that. And eventually, I was accepted to go into the Army in the lowest possible rank of buck private. And it was there that I began my career, a change in my career from a kid going to high school to a soldier with America at war. But that's another story. So we'll save that story unless you want to go on.
Yes, well, if you can tell us first about how you got into Harvard, and why did you decide to study? Well, you just told us about the crime you have seen, but why did you decided to study law?
Well, I made up my mind early when I heard an uncle of mine saying that Benny would make a good lawyer or a good crook. I didn't know what a lawyer was, but I didn't want to be a crook. So I said, I want to be a lawyer. And I didn't really know what a lawyer was. I thought Brooklyn Law School was maybe nearby, and I knew that. But it was explained to me that this was, you had to go to college first, and then you go to law school, and so on. And I went through the routine with very little idea of where it was going or why I was there. But the dean in the high school, Townsend Harris High School, he sent a note to my draft board. Soldiers were all being drafted to go into the Army. And he said, this boy shows unusual promise. Can you extend his induction into the Army for a couple of months when the semester will be over? So they extended me on the theory that I had unusual promise. And, I went into the Army, and they, of course, immediately recognized my talent. So they gave me the dirtiest job they possibly could find. The lowest person doing cleaning the toilets. I was the expert, and no matter how I cleaned it, they said, do it again. You're an educated man. You can do better than that. I had also then, after that, applied. I said, what's the best law school in the world? Because I was very short, about 5 feet tall, 5'2" if you want to count my 2 feet on my shoes. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be able to stop crime. So my interest at a very early age, I would say, in Hell's Kitchen, I had decided I didn't want to be like the other kids. And so I found myself then asking which is the best law school in the world. And somebody said Harvard. So I wrote them a letter. And I said, I'd like to be a student. I have no money. I'd like to be a student. So they admitted me to Harvard, and they granted me a full scholarship. I didn't realize it at the time that you had to pay for it, but they granted me a full scholarship. And I see a picture there of me sitting in Harvard with a Harvard banner and that graduation hat on my head. I was young then, and I went to Harvard, and I did sufficiently well that they gave me a full scholarship, and I graduated with honors and was hired by Harvard to be a student advisor, where students could go to for help on any work they had. So while I was there, the war had started, and as soon as I had finished school, I immediately went to the draft board and said, I've now finished school. They said, all right, you're being inducted now. And they inducted me into the United States Army. And they gave me the lowest possible rank, buck private. And being a Harvard graduate didn't help. The contrary. Said, oh, Harvard graduate, we'll give you a job, a nasty job. And so the Army took me in, and I went through basic training in the United States. Then a general came down and he said to us, now, gentlemen, you're in an anti-aircraft artillery battalion. Your job will be to shoot down the high-flying planes. He said, but don't worry, we have a secret weapon known as radar. And when the German planes are heading for you, they get picked up by the radar. We then connect with automatic firing to the 50 caliber machine guns, which we have on the ground, and they will automatically be fired and hit the target so that nothing's going to happen to the people on the ground. And you're going to be safe, and you're going to have to go into France, go into the ocean and get into France and liberate France, which was occupied by Germany. So that was the introduction in theory. When we got to where we were going, which was Normandy Beach, so-called the coast of France, and the planes came, and instead of shooting down whatever they were supposed to do with the radar, they targeted us on the ground very well, because the Germans took pigeons and they painted them with aluminum paint. And each plane would carry a few pigeons. They would turn the pigeons loose when we approached the target, and the guns would start shooting at the pigeons. We were the dead ducks down below. So what the general had told us to reassure us was a plain absolute lie. And I recognized that right away, and we all did, which of course had some influence on my attitude toward the US Army. But that's another story of my Army career. And I'll tell that if you like, but tell me if you have any questions. Or
yes, please. It's amazing also, amazing and terrible, because we know about the landing of Normandy and the D-Day. We will like to know about your experience in that day, because of course it was such an important historical fact. Just to remind to our public that the D-Day was the invasion of Normandy, and it was one of the most important military operations, right? That led to the liberation of, from the Nazi regime, the concentration camps, etc. But of course, for you as a soldier, it was also a traumatic experience, right? To be there. So please tell us about the D-Day.
Well, traumatic experience is one way to put it. We had waited for weeks for good weather to come, and we were eager to go. By the time we got there, we were all eager to start already, because we kept postponing it. The Germans had occupied all of France. France had surrendered. The beaches of Normandy, which was the area of France where we had planned landings, several landings, was very tightly guarded by the Germans, as I've indicated. And when the time came, they blew a whistle. Everybody gets into a little speedboat, which were British provided, and we raced onto the beach. Well, when I got there were many dead bodies floating on the water, wearing American uniforms, face down in the water. I jumped into the water, came down a plank. For everybody else, the water came up to their ankle. For me, it came up to my knees. But I know I had to go forward. And I did go forward. There I met some of the other soldiers from my outfit, anti-aircraft artillery. They're all stories I've written, books about them. The book on this is, well, I'm not selling books, but it's been recorded. Everybody look at my website, it's free. Everything is free on my website. All the books I've written, I wrote a dozen books. And so it was a very grim affair. When we finally got ashore, the dead bodies were, of course, lying on the ground, on the beach as well. And, well, we broke through the lines and continued on. It was the same as we went forward. It was more and more difficult. The next town I remember going into was, I've skipped the name for the moment, it'll come to me. It was at a crossroad where we had to go through that town in order to go beyond it. And it was explained to us, you're going to take that town. And they called on the Air Force. And the Air Force came and they dropped bombs like rain. You couldn't see the sky. The ground was shaking. We couldn't stand it. We had to fall down on the ground. And they bombed the hell out of St. Lo, was the name of the town. And then somebody blew a whistle, we advanced. Well, when we got to St. Lo, which was over the hill, there was no St. Lo. All the houses were lying in the road. They had been bombed, brick stone houses had fallen in the road. We drove over the houses to go forward. You couldn't see a road anymore. And I realized that everybody who was in St. Lo was dead. Nobody could survive that kind of a bombing. And when everything was flattened, and there were Frenchmen, that was a French town. They were Frenchmen, they had children, they had cats, they had dogs. Nothing survived that first thrust into France. And from there we went on city after city, similar type of experience. In every case, tough resistance coming from the Germans. The Americans pushing forward, the British coming along later. Well, eventually we got to a point where the war was over. I could repeat all kinds of things, but before we got to that point, I had been promoted to a corporal. Big deal. And I was taken out of the artillery, about which, of course, I knew nothing. So they appointed me as a clerk typist. I didn't know how to type either. But they pulled me out and they said, "You have orders from Washington to transfer you to the Judge Advocate section, which is a legal section of the Army, and to set up a war crimes branch." And it said, "Your name has been forwarded from the Pentagon." Well, I thought, who in the Pentagon got that bright idea? Well, during my time at Harvard, I had no money. I worked for a professor, Sheldon Gluck was his name, who decided Germany was already at war with some of the European countries. He'd write a book on war crimes, and he needed somebody to do the research on that. And so he hired me, and I read everything in the Harvard Law Library, and later in all other libraries as well, about war crimes, and I gave him a little summary on one page, and he incorporated that in a book on war crimes. And when the Pentagon was in touch with him, as he was constantly at that time, a student of mine is over there somewhere, go find Benny. And he knows all about this and how to set up war crimes and so on. So when they tapped me on the shoulder, they said, you go transfer to the judge advocate section. Well, I got to the judge advocate section, and it was a colonel met me there. And he said, your name has been forwarded for Washington with instructions to set up a war crimes branch. And this is the honest truth. He said, what's a war crime? So the soldiers knew conduct unbecoming an officer. They knew about absent without leave. They didn't know what a war crime was. So I said, I'll explain it to you. And by that time, I was already a corporal, and I knew more about war crimes than anybody else in the United States Army. I think I was the first man to deal with war crimes in the United States Army. So the next person who came to me was a fellow by the name of Jack Nowitz. He was also a private who had been at Yale Law School, and he had also been assigned to the war crimes branch. And he came into my office and he saluted me. He said, I'm ordered to report on war crimes. I said, sit down, you jerk, I'm corporal too. I said, we'll see what we do. And so that's how the war crimes program began. Now it begins to get a little more interesting, maybe from your point of view. We would get a report, which was forwarded to the headquarters of the Third Army. It was General Patton's army. His name got to be known in America. George Patton. General Patton would say, we have overcome what looks like a work camp, and the people are coming out, looks like they're all starving. They just reported on what they had seen when the tanks came rolling into the camps. I said, let's go. I jumped in a Jeep and I raced to the camp. When I got there, I saw, there's my Jeep, him or a line that says, always alone. I said to the colonel, just give me a Jeep and turn me loose. I'll get the job done. Just get out of my way. And so I was given the Jeep. I painted Immer line, which in German means always alone. And I think that's one of my buddies on the war crimes group. I'm sure it was. We eventually had 3 more guys. And I raced into the camp. Now, the scene in the camp, and there were many camps, and they were all basically the same. What I saw was first many dead people lying on the ground. Tank battalion would come, but usually the first unit which got there. And people that were still milling around, looking very thin, just looked like they'd been starved. Some people digging in the garbage, big piles of garbage, looking for a piece of bread or something that could end their starvation. The SS in the camp were fleeing out. The Americans were chasing them. It was a horror camp, really. They were all the same. Well, I was to find out who was the American commander in charge. And I'd go to the commander, the tank battalion usually, and I'd say, look, I'm here on orders of General Patton. I had prepared a little authorization slip with his name on it, which was signed by a lieutenant. And I said, I'm under orders to collect evidence of war crimes. I want 10 men immediately to surround the Schreibstube. The Schreibstube in the office. Nobody goes in or out without my permission, because if anybody got in there, our American soldiers or the people who were still there, they would destroy it. So I get 10 men surrounded, nobody in or out. I would go in and find who was the inmate who was handling clerical work. And these were always inmates themselves. They were not German soldiers. And I would say, well, what have you got here? So we had the lists of the people who came into the camp, where they came from, what their name was, what their nationality was. And they also had a little book for the soldiers, the German soldiers in the camp. They had an evening club. And if you went to the club at night, they put a stamp in that book. When the book was filled, the inmate who was issuing these books was supposed to issue a new one, but destroy the old one. He didn't destroy the old one. He saved it. Now, if they had caught him saving those books, they would have killed him on the spot, I have no doubt. So he kept it hidden. And when he had a box full of those little books, which showed a picture of the SS officer who was a member of the club and the dates when he was there, he buried them and near the fence, the electrified fence. All the camps were surrounded by high barbed wire, electrified, so if you touched it, you'd be killed. So he went and he, near the pole where the SS was sitting on top so they could see the whole camp, but right at the base, it would be fairly safe. They dug a hole and he buried this. And he said, I've been waiting for you. Here's this. And he gave me a box, a wooden box. I dusted it off. And there I found the cards of all these SS guys who had been entertaining themselves in the camp. But when the card was full, they got a new one. And I had the old cards with their picture and their date and their times. Terrific piece of evidence. But what impressed me more, that every time this inmate did that, he took his life into his hands. They would have killed him. He said, I've been waiting for you. He still had enough faith and courage to do that, knowing that there would be a day of reckoning. And that was it. So we were greeted, welcome our liberators. That's me sitting in a corner. So that's a little incident of, it's hard for me to recall them. You want to cry. But that was my first impression. And anyway, the camp was liberated. The SS, some of them fled. Some of them were captured, taken prisoner. Some of them were beaten on the spot. I had an incident in another camp. I went from one camp to another. I went to about half a dozen camps. The inmates caught one of the guards. And they beat him and they put him on a tray, a trolley, which they transported bodies to the crematorium. And had two wheels on it and they push it. And they got this inmate and this guard, and they began to beat him, and then they took him to the crematorium and put him in. They tied him to this stretcher that was used, and they pushed him in the crematorium. They let him cook for a while. Then they took him out again, but he was still alive. So they pushed him in again, and they beat him again until finally he was obviously well done. He was cooked. And I'm watching this. And this turmoil in the camp, of course, various kinds. Some of the SS trying to run away, some of the inmates, some of them were still able to fight. Mostly they were Russian prisoners of war who still had enough strength to undertake that. And I saw the effect of revenge. And it was a horrible thing. I asked myself, could I try to stop it? I had an M1 rifle, and I had stopped him in France from clipping the hair off girls who had been fraternizing with German soldiers. And I had stopped they would do it in the town square. They tie her to a chair, take a clipper and clip all her hair off. And the townspeople would spit on her and slap her in the face. It was a grim thing too. And I just fire a couple of shots into the air. She's under arrest. And I take her and put her in my Jeep and drive off. Say, where do you live? Over there, we'll get out now. And I was able to do that in France in those type of cases. And I thought about, can I try to stop this in the camp? And I had two feelings. One, it wouldn't help because these guys were on a rampage, inmates. And secondly, they might turn on me. And thirdly, really, they probably deserve it. And so I saw it firsthand. And the lesson I carried away with that is that vengeance can be very mean and rotten and is to be avoided. It was where I got convinced about the preference of the rule of law, no matter what. It's going to be better than beating them up and cooking them, which I witnessed. Well, I think that's enough on this phase of my work.
I can't imagine. I mean, we can't imagine the horror, you know, that of course you experience, as a part of the liberator side, because you had to go into these terrible places, like they were like hell, and you didn't know about what was happening, like really the madness, the horror, and going into these places, you know, to collect all this evidence that you had and all this terrible and hard experience you told us. I know that it was so frightening. But what I can recall about this is that you're saying something so important, that the revenge is not like the good way, you know. The revenge just causes more terrible stuff. So I mean, your labor was such a difficult labor, but so necessary. Because of that, right now we can have a lot of information, you know, about the Holocaust, and we can say that it happened. So if people deny it, we can say, no, it happened. We have living witnesses that were survivors, or for example, that you were the part of the liberators, that you saw everything. So thank you. I know it's so difficult to talk about this, but if you can tell us about now, about after the war, you know, what did you do and how did you ended up being part of the trials of Nuremberg?
Well, the war was over. I went home together with 10 million other soldiers looking for a job. I had graduated from the Harvard Law School with honors, and I went to the big law firms. They said, how many clients can you bring with you? My clients that I knew had only a tattoo on their arm. They had nothing to bring with me, so I had difficulty finding a job. And one day I got a telegram from the Pentagon saying, dear sir, in all my years in the Army, they never called me sir, but they said, we've come to Washington. We'd like to interview you for a position. So I went to Washington, and there I was introduced. First, I have to explain the setting. The war crime trial, the International Military Tribunal, was set up by the four victorious Allied powers: the United States, France, Russia, and England. The American chief prosecutor, who carried a great deal of the ball and inspirationally, was Justice Robert Jackson, a very admired judge on the American Supreme Court. And those trials had gotten started by the time I got on the scene. And I saw the trials when they were in session. And the United States had concluded that it wasn't enough to just take a sampling of a few of the top leaders, but you ought to give them additional trials, how different groups of people were perverted into doing the most horrible crimes. And so they decided upon 12 different trials, one against the doctors, perform medical experiments on innocent concentration camp victims, ones against the lawyers and judges who sentenced people for political reasons. You had against the industrialists who worked people to death in their camps. And so these 12 trials were designed to give the German public primarily a sense of what this was all about and give the world a sense on trying to understand how you could do that. So they called me to Washington and they wanted me to set up a war crimes tribunal of some kind. I had already written on the subject and written, rehabilitating of army offenders was an article I remember in the law journals. Anyway, I had the problem of how do you set up the trials and who do you try? One of my researchers, I had researchers were assigned to me. I had about 50 researchers. We went into Berlin where these offices were kept of all the different branches of the German hierarchy. And we had certain suspects in custody in Nuremberg, where the trials were all going against Goering and company. And my instruction to the staff was, look, I will divide them into different portions, A, B, C, and D, of the territory in which the German troops were advancing and committing crimes, and to arrest those against whom we had overwhelming evidence of committing overwhelming crimes. And one day, a young Swiss boy who spoke German, of course they all know German, he said, look what I found. And he brought in a stack of papers. Oh, I don't have anything here like that.
Make it short, make it short, make it short, make it short.
He brought me a stack of papers, and these were in German, Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, which showing off my German. Translation was situation reports from the Soviet Union. These were daily accounts, which were sent by the commanders in the field, saying how many people they killed, where, who was in charge, and he forwarded to headquarters where it was consolidated, forwarded to Berlin. Berlin took the consolidated copies, which they sent it out to various SS and Nazi leaders all over Germany, 99 copies. I had the copies, I had the names of the people, I had the evidence of the time and the place, I had the commanding officers who signed the report, all in one big bundle. And I said, this is what we got to put on a special trial for this case. So I flew from Berlin down to Nuremberg, where the trials were already beginning. And I spoke there to the man in charge of these subsequent proceedings, as we called it, General Telford Taylor. We were later law partners in New York. But at that time, he was general, and I think I had been promoted to sergeant. I said, we have to put on a new trial. He said, we can't. The lawyers have already all been assigned. The budget has been allocated. The Army is not very eager to continue with these crimes. They'll never agree. The Pentagon will never agree. We can't put on a trial. I said, look, I have in my hands right here a case of mass murder of 1 million people. And I had added them up on my little adding machine I picked up from one of the offices there. And when I got to 100, I stopped 1,000. 1 million, when I got to 1 million.
The public wants to ask you questions.
Well, not maybe the questions I have here, and if anyone else has another question in the chat, but yeah, we want to know about what you're saying. Of course, I will want to specifically ask about the Insights group and case that you were saying, right? Can you tell us about, like, shortly, how was the Einsatzgruppen case that was led by you?
Okay,
Short, make it short.
either you speak or I speak.
She told me
Okay,
that, make it short.
The
Because medium
Einsatzgruppen
question.
report, see, and there's a picture there in action, except there wouldn't be 4 shooting one person, they have 1 shooting 40 or 100. These defined exactly what was done by that particular unit, special. They didn't word Einsatzgruppen can't be translated to action group. And I total 1 million people murdered that way, mostly Jews. The instruction was kill every Jewish man, woman, and child. Whatever you catch them, wherever you find them, kill them all. Do the same with gypsies. Do the same with some Nazi leaders, some Allied leaders, rather. Based on that, I said, look, you have to put these guys on trial. And he said, we can't. I said, you can't let him go. I mean, it's murder. He said, can you do it in addition to your other investigative responsibilities? I said, sure. He said, okay, you do it. So I was appointed the chief prosecutor in what turned out to be the biggest murder trial in human history. I charged 22 defendants. The number was limited because we only had 22 when Hermann Goering was one of the Nazis put on trial. It was the International Military Tribunal. This is in addition to the International Military Tribunal. And they only had 22 seats for the defendants. So it's a ridiculous reason, but I had to limit it. So I selected people among the Einsatzgruppen who were in captivity, because if they're not in captivity, you've got nothing. And if you have a guy in captivity, but you don't have evidence, you've got nothing. So I had a list of who were in captivity. I had checked them out for what they had been doing and compared it with what they had been reporting. And on that basis, I indicted them. And the opening statement, since you were referring to it, things like a vengeance, I was very specific. I said, vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law. What you have there on the film now is I was 27 years old, and I was opening the Einsatzgruppen trial. I asked the court to set a rule of law which would protect everyone everywhere and assert the right of all human beings, regardless of race or color or creed, to live in peace and human dignity. And if you don't do that, you're committing a crime against humanity. It's the first time I used that crime in a prosecution also. It was, I rested my case after 3 days. I detailed from their own reports exactly how many people they reported they had killed in which town at which time. I summed it up by saying the defendants in the dock wrote the blackest page in human history. Death was their tool and life was their toy. If these men be immune, then law has lost its meaning and we must all live in fear. I'm sorry if I'm really carried away a bit by the memory of, I was 27 years old, I'm 102 years old now.
Yes, you were so young, and as far as I know, it was your first trial, and it was the most important trial in the history. And it's not just that; it's that you made an amazing labor. You know, like getting this justice for what happened, and also not just that, the thing that you introduced this term about crimes about humanity, and you are like one of the pioneers of the International Court. I think that's your legacy, and that's amazing, because we should not have more war in this world, as you say, right? Law, not war. That's an amazing and a beautiful quote.
Was I summarized everything. I ended with a slogan, law, not war. I asked audiences, college students, do you think war is better than law? Surprisingly, very often they say, yes, you got to fight, you know, for your rights. I say, you're crazy, you're out of your mind. Law, even if you get a bad decision, is better than a decision you go to war, which kills millions of innocent people, had nothing to do with it. The people who started the war, who caused the war, they're usually not members, they're staying home. They send young kids like you out to go out and kill other young kids like you, who never harmed you, who never did any harm to anybody. And then they kill them. And you think that's glorious? I don't think that's glorious. We are men of law. Anyway, that gets me off into what I've been doing with the rest of my life. So I came away convinced that human beings could behave in a horrible way. I asked them, why do you kill the children? Well, if they grew up and knew that we had killed their parents, they would be enemies of Germany too. And we were interested in long-range protection of our fatherland. Therefore, we had to kill them too. Logical. So, you know, well, why do you kill the gypsies who played music and so on? Well, you know, nobody trusts the gypsies. They play both sides of the street. So we had to kill all of them too. They had these excuses to justify where they killed 1 million people, according to their reports. Well, it wasn't very persuasive to me. And it was not persuasive either to the 3 American judges who tried the case, led by Justice Michael Masmano, who was the Superior Court of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And they were all found guilty, and 13 of them were sentenced to death. I'll pause for a moment to tell you what the courtroom scene looked like and felt like. I had been sitting in the courtroom on a Sunday afternoon, going over my opening statement, trying to prepare it so it stated what I wanted to come out of the trial. And Monday morning it started, and they had been read. First, they had the sentence, the substance of the trial. They were found guilty of various events before the sentencing. The sentencing was left for the next day. And they were all found guilty of that. They had to be. I had all their proof. The best proof is a contemporaneous document written at the time of the crime. You don't need any witnesses, and you got it signed by the guy who's committed the crime. You can't beat that. And I saw that right away as a lawyer. I got A in criminal law. So then came the sentencing. Dead silence in the courtroom. First sentence, the lead defendant. All the defendants selected by me on the basis of their rank and their education. Dr. Otto Ollendorf. I had several double doctor. All of them well-educated, high-ranking guys, general in the SS. He listens. Judge Masmano says, for the crimes of which you have been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. They had earphones on, translated to German. Take the earphones off, bow to the court, put the earphones down on the side, and step back 2 steps. There's an elevator, a small lift, they call it, just about this wide, which goes down to the prison, which is right under the courthouse. They'd step back, the doors would close, drop them down into hell. That was the end of that. The next one, for the crimes for which you've been convicted, this tribunal sends you death by hanging. Next one, death by hanging, death by hanging. dead silent in the courtroom. No applause, no cheers, no nothing. I found it like a hammering into my head with a hammer. It was customary there for the chief prosecutor of all the subsequent trials to invite his staff to his home for a party after the trial was over. And I had invited my staff I had 3 other attorneys and some other researchers, translators and so on. I invited them to come to my home in Nuremberg. We would celebrate the end of the trial. I couldn't go. I went home, went to bed. My head was just pounding. And that's the way the court was. It was absolutely silent.
Yes, I know it was like, okay, you were getting justice, but you didn't want to have like those kind of revenge, you know. For you, it was also difficult to hear that they were going to be killed, right? Because that type of justice, well, it depends on the case, and it's difficult to know if killing someone it's justice, you know. It's just kind of controversial. But where you were saying about we have a question since the other interview I made you that I think it's so interesting. You know, today we are being interpreted, we having simultaneous translation, and in the Nuremberg trials it was the first time in the world that they had simultaneous translation. So please tell us about something about the simultaneous translation in Nuremberg trials, or how it was.
Well, it's true. It was the first time at the original Nuremberg trial and then the 12 subsequent trials that we translated simultaneously, because the defendants were entitled to know in what language they're being charged. It was primarily done for their benefit, and of course anybody in the audience who needed it. But we had hired translators who heard the testimony, simultaneously would say in German, if the trial were in English, and they had copies of everything. All the evidence which was introduced against them was given to them, I think, weeks in advance, days for sure. So they knew what was coming, and they knew what was being said. If they didn't understand the language, they got it in German as well, and the documents were all in German. And so we had to worry about translating that for our judges more than for the other way around. And so it was a more efficient way. We wanted to be sure to give them a fair trial. Everybody felt that way. I felt the same way too. That seems to have been forgotten in any recent events with war criminals. But the feeling was, give them a fair trial. The Russians said, "What do we need a fair trial?" They murdered thousands and millions of Russian troops who were prisoners of war, and they did. They killed them all in the wintertime. And what do you need a trial for? So the Russians were not convinced that we needed a trial, because we had the fact. We know what they did. And but the American way was indict them, let them know in advance what they're going to be charged with, give them counsel of their own choice. I had 22 defendants. Each one was entitled to a German defense lawyer of his choice, or an American defense lawyer. Some of them picked their defense lawyer. So 22 defendants, I had 44 German lawyers against me.
We just have, sorry.
Yeah.
That we just have like 3 more like short questions because of the time. The first one is about, please tell us about, shortly about how you are a pioneer of the International Criminal Court, and about the restitution of the Holocaust survivors that you fulfilled after the war.
Yes, it occurred to me very early on that what we're dealing with here is not just one trial against 22 defendants or 24 defendants or 10 trials. what we're trying to do is to set up a legal system which will protect everybody who would normally be killed if you wanted to kill people of different race or different color. And in order to do that, you have to have several things. One, you have to clarify what the law is. I wrote 2 volumes on defining international law. Secondly, you have to have a court to try them. It has to be a fair tribunal. I wrote 2 volumes on an international criminal court. Thirdly, you need enforcement of the rules that you're laying down for everybody. It must bind everybody equally. I wrote the 2 volumes. We're still waiting for enforcement. The nations have not yet come to that. We have created new rules, universal declarations of human rights, picked up in many national jurisdictions as well. We have courts, the International Criminal Court, which was set up after the Nuremberg trials. The trials were still on, set them up, international criminal courts in Nuremberg, in The Hague, excuse me, in The Hague. They invited me to do the closing remarks of their first case, which I was very tickled to do. And the enforcement arm, and we have other international courts now in all different parts of the world who have picked up from the Nuremberg precedent. What we have not done is done anything to really enforce the rules. And if we don't enforce them, you might as well not have them because it's phony. And so the missing link is still missing. These are the chief prosecutor, that's another prosecutor, the judges. So I have worked very hard trying to convince nations to create international criminal courts to agree. They finally have an international criminal court in The Hague. They tell me recently they put a bust of my head there in the entrance. And I know they have a bench mark called Ben Ferencz bench, says law, not war, and in front of the international court. But it's still moving, and many people don't want it. Many people are not convinced that we need it. The Russians were never convinced. They said, look, if you know who did kill, they kill. And I'm ashamed to say that President of the United States, when he sent his troops to kill a foreign general, saying take him out, because we thought he was connected with the bombing of the Trade Center in New York. And I felt you should give everybody a fair trial. And you don't just tell your troops to go take him out. They took him out and they killed him. I consider that murder. So it's not that easy. And people don't understand it. They're worrying about the expense. They're worrying about the accessibility of getting to the criminal. He is often protected by the country in which he lives. He is often doing the work for the country. He is also a head of state for the country. And they want to go around and kill their adversaries. That's the world in which you live, not me. I'm checking out. But until you have law, courts, and enforcement, you've got an imperfect system. And it won't work because any one of those component parts of a rational legal order is vital. And we are moving in that direction. I am not discouraged. I am encouraged by all the praise that I get for seeing the picture, law, not war. Some people think it's a fool's errand. They will never have it. Maybe they'll be right. I don't know. I won't be here, but I'll live forever.
I know it's amazing the labor you have done in all your life to ensure justice. Law, not war, and making this base for the International Criminal Court. I think that was so important for our future and our present. So we will just have two questions. The first one is from Bahia Blanca, someone here in the chat, and she's asking, in 1947, did you realize your huge contributions for the humanity and for law?
No, I did not, because I was working then on the next phase, compensation for the survivors. It's not enough to just punish the criminals. What about the poor survivors who were killed? You can't compensate for death because we refuse to measure the value of a human life. Was grandpa worth more than grandma? But you have to think of restoring the condition it was for. I learned that the first year at Harvard. If you do harm, you have to apprehend the perpetrator. You must hold him accountable. You must try to repair the injury done. If you can't heal him completely, the least you can do is give him some compensation and enable him to live in his future. And I worked very hard setting that up with officers all around the world, wherever there were all Nazi victims, regardless of their race, creed, or color, if they were persecuted and became disabled and lost their jobs and so on, or were working as slave laborers for some of the big German companies, IG Farben, Krupp, Siemens, IG. I wrote a book on that called Less Than Slaves. They were less than slaves. The slaves you tried to keep alive. Here they tried to work them to death. The moment they couldn't work, they sent them over to Auschwitz to be burned. That was the system. And that was a system confirmed to me by Albert Speer, who was the minister, Nazi minister in charge of this, and who spent 20 years in Spandau prison for his participation. So these three different capacities, defining the crime, setting up the courts to try the victims, and adequate punishment or treatment of them. These are the components which we still need to honor, and Nuremberg set the precedent, and it's up to you to carry it forward.
Yes, thank you so much. And as you were saying, I think that the restitution part was so important too, because the victims needed to have well, as you said, how can you restitute someone that has lost all his family? It's not possible, but in the possibilities, so the last question is from Eleni Z in the chat, and she's asking, do you feel that Germans and Austrians got away with their crimes? And if yes, was it only because of the Cold War or anti-Semitism in the West played part?
I asked myself that question before the trial began. I knew that there were 1,000 men engaged in mass murder every day. Every day, they killed thousands of Jews and gypsies and others. I knew that I could only take 22 because that was the only space in the courtroom. I knew that the rest of them would probably never be tried. I said, is that just? Of course not. The scales of justice require equal justice on all sides. We had no opportunity to have equal justice. I'd still be in Nuremberg prosecuting criminals. The crimes were so enormous that you couldn't possibly, do it within the framework of a normal judicial system. And the result is that thousands of Germans who killed millions of Jews and others got no punish at all. Well, we began. We hope that they will recognize that what they did was not acceptable in a civilized society. I suppose many of them did. Some of them probably did not. That's the best we can do. You see your goals and work toward them. And if you don't have perfection, try to make it perfect.
Yes, exactly. And just for finishing, everyone wants to know, what's your message, like a short message for the young people, and also, for example, the lawyers, the students and the lawyers. What would you finish this meeting with a message?
The message for the young people is never give up. We are making real progress. We have created other international criminal courts for other jurisdictions. It's all on my website. It's all free if you want to look at it. My name, then it'll bring you to it. So I refuse to be discouraged because it's so obviously true that if you have a trial, it's better than sending thousands of young people out to kill other young people they don't even know. It's a horrible system which we developed when we didn't have the capacity to do what we have now. We have a capacity from cyberspace to kill everybody on this planet. I'm talking about you. And I had it from a general with whom I was meeting in St. Petersburg, Russia, at a sort of a peace conference, a graduating class. We were having breakfast together. And I said, what are you up to now, General? He said, I'm working on the cyberspace problem. I said, what's that? He said, well, you know, he looked around the restaurant where we were sitting, and he said, you know, we now have the capacity to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. I said, no, I didn't know that. How long would you think people would live? He said, well, it depends upon how much water they had. If they had enough water, they probably could survive for about a week. I said, what then? They're all dead. That was several years ago. Otherwise, I couldn't talk about it now. Now articles have been written. But the capacity to kill has advanced. In the good old days, the American Revolution, all you had was a horse and a bayonet. Then we developed the tank, and then we developed the airplanes, and then we developed something else, and nuclear bombs. And we are always learning how to kill more people. What the heck kind of a world is that we're living in? So I challenge the young people, don't buy it, kids, don't buy it. Law, not war. Even if it's a bad decision, it's better than what the war will be like. You look into the cyberspace attack, which I asked this general. I said, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm on my way now to China because they can do the same thing. So can the Russians. I'm sure the Americans had it before. So we have an increasing capacity to kill more and more people like you. Not like me, I beat them to the punch, but like you. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to take it lying down and wait for it to happen? Or are you going to make it clear to all politicians you elect to any office? You are here to serve the people, not to kill them, to serve them so they can live in peace and dignity, which means have a job, be able to send their kids to school, be able to send the old people to a hospital when they need it. That's what we should be concentrating on instead of new weapons to kill more people. So I leave it to you kids. The ball is now in your court. One day the flag will drop from my hand and I say, pick it up and run with it. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But don't let it go on the way it is now. Change it. It's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that powerful message. I think that message inspires all young people, adult people, lawyers, everyone to make a better world. And thank you so much. We learned a lot from you. It's amazing that you have more than 100 years and you are with this spirit and with this willing to teach people, you know, and inspire us to create this world, a peaceful world. Thank you so much. And just before, just before leaving, I would like to read again. I think I already gave you this poem, but I want for everyone to know, to read this poem I wrote for you, inspired in your quote, law not war, so we can finish this meeting with this. And also don't go because we're going to take a group picture of this interview. Okay, so I will read it. Law not war. His life was like a war, escaping from his country. His destiny was law, and to set the world free. Ben persecuted the evil, encouraging all of us to apply the law, not war, to do good and never give up. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you, really.
Very good summary, very good summary. And you'll be happy to know that just last week, bill was introduced in the Congress to give me a U.S. Congressional Gold Medal for the work I've done. It still has to pass through both houses of the Congress.
You will get it.
But they tell me that it's coming very soon. The Harvard
Oh,
Law.
that's amazing. Congratulations.
Beg pardon? I didn't hear that.
Congratulations, Ben. Your labor has been amazing and you deserve the world, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us your experience. We want to take a picture, so if everyone can turn on your cameras, it will be amazing so you can be in this picture of the meeting.
What do you
Okay.
want?
Just, no. Watch the camera, Ben.
Oh, I see,
That's
I
it.
see.
No, those, yeah, watch the camera. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, I'm just waiting a minute. Everyone is turning on the camera. Okay, I will ask you right now that if you please don't send messages right now in the chat because I am going to take the picture, you know. Okay, so I will take the picture. Just wait me. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Another one because we have a lot of people here. One. Wait a minute. It's charging. 1, 2, and 3. And the last one. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you so much for turning on your cameras. Okay, I don't know if Dr. Woskov wants to say something. If not, I would like you to invite you to our next events. But Dr. Woskov, I don't know if you want to say something to finish.
And you send me a copy of your film so that I can.
Of course, yeah, I will send it to Cardora.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Solo agradecerle a todos ustedes y particularmente una vez más a Ben por sus palabras que nos dejan un camino a recorrer. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woskov. And just before we leave, I would like to invite, for the people that speak Spanish, because unfortunately this event I'm going to tell you is in Spanish. Tomorrow, me and Jessica, we will be talking for a government organization of my where I live, Morelos, Mexico. We're going to be talking about our project about the voice of the silence. The conference is called Remember to Not Repeat. So we will be in this webinar tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Mexico. It will be in Spanish for the ones that speak Spanish. And I sent the link in the chat. But also if you would like to register to our mail list, I sent the Google Forms. I will send it again to the chat if you want to register to our next interviews. Yeah, tomorrow is this one about the voice of the silence, about my story, because my ancestors were Jewish and Polish and they were persecuted in the Holocaust. And we also wanted to invite you to our next event that, yeah, it's also in Spanish, but we will have in English in January, okay? So keep posted. The next event we are having is next Friday, December 10th. It will be an interview in Spanish with Sophie Goldberg. She is a daughter of Holocaust survivors, and she's an author of 2 or 3 books. And she wrote this book, The Jardín del Mar, the Ocean Garden, something like that, about the story of her dad. So you can register in the link I sent in the chat. So thank you so much, really, everyone. It has been an amazing meeting. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Carlota. Thank you, Dr. Woskov, Jessica, Isaac from Diario Judío, also the 2 interpreters, Fridas Garcia. Thank you so much for being here, and we wait for you in the next interviews. Thank you so much, and you can follow us in our social media. And thank you so much. You can open your camera and your microphone to say bye, and thank you to Ben. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Hag Sameach.
Hag Sameach, yeah. Happy Hanukkah to everyone. Ben, happy Hanukkah, please. Hag Sameach.
Thank you, Ben.
Gracias.
Thank you, Ben.
We wish you a really happy Hanukkah to all our Jewish friends. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
The transcript will be available at the address in the recording at the address in the chat. that you gave
Yes,
in the chat?
the
Okay,
the recording is on our Facebook page. I will send right now that is the link of the broadcast in Facebook.
okay.
It's in English. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Jesse.